Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. When I was a kid, we didn't have a record player and we barely had a cassette player. What we did have was the radio. And as radios go, you have multiple radio stations, so you're always trying to get to that exact, precise, clear sound. Which is a problem because someone else during the day has gone and listened to some other station, and then you have to go back to the exact signal that you wanted. To go away from that noise, to go away from all of these other stations, and to get exactly what you want. In other words, you had to recalibrate. But if you fast forward to today and you go to a radio station, it's just one button. You click, you're on that signal. And so we get this idea that life should be like that. Click, we're on. Click, we're off. There is no scope or time spent in recalibration. And that's precisely what today's podcast is about. It's about how to recalibrate your life's priorities. The stuff that we want to do, the stuff that we wanted to do for the longest time, and somehow, somewhere, we've lost our signal. And now it's time to get it back. How do we go about it? In this podcast, we'll cover 3 steps. The first is the core priorities. The second is how to calibrate. And the third is how to recalibrate using the worst possible day scenario. Let's start out with the first one, which is the concept of core priorities. When we look at our to-do list, we can roughly move everything into 3 boxes. The first box is the urgent box. The second is the hobbies box. And the third is the hate doing box. When we look at the urgent box, it's very simple. It needs to be done either because you have a deadline, because you promised someone something, you have a job to complete, you have to pay the bills, whatever the reason for it, it has to be completed right away. The roof has just collapsed. You have to fix it. It's urgent. That cannot be put off, so it gets done. That's a priority that cannot be ignored at any cost, and so we get it done. But we all know how to deal with urgent. We may get stressed, we may get frustrated, but we have learned how to deal with the urgent situation. And then we go wildly careening between one urgent situation and the other throughout our lives. And in doing so, what we miss out is the second box. And the second box is really hobbies. You know, there was a time when we did stuff and we didn't have to put it on Instagram and we didn't have to put it on Facebook and we didn't have to get any likes, and we just did stuff because it brought us an immense amount of joy. For instance, my father loved plants, he loved gardening, but not the gardening that you're expecting. It's not some backyard or front yard. We lived on the 2nd floor. And the only place that he could grow anything was out in the balcony. And not the whole balcony, of course, because we had to go out there and we had to look at the rain coming down and we had to enjoy the sunshine. And so he just had this 1 foot by maybe 12 feet worth of space. And in that he grew dozens of cacti and all sorts of plants. And that was his hobby. When we look at our lives, we are so driven by this productivity. We have to do stuff. We have to complete stuff. We have to achieve stuff. We have to read stuff. That we forget that the purpose of starting up a business is not about business. It's about life. we get into business so that we can have a better life, so that we are not controlled all the time by someone telling us what to do and when to do it. And that is precisely what that first box is about. It's always about the urgent. It's always about being an employee with a boss telling you what you have to do. Even if that boss is yourself, you're working for yourself, but you're constantly working on the urgent. And yes, there are things that relate to kids, and there are things that relate to your family. They're all urgent, which means that the second box, which is the hobbies, the thing that brings us great amounts of joy, that gets neglected. We know that it's something that we want to do, but we keep putting it off. So we have these two boxes, the urgent and the hobbies, and then there's the third box, which is the stuff that we absolutely hate doing. One of the things that I hate doing is putting cream. You don't have to know this, but you're going to listen to it anyway. Yes, I put foot cream for my heels because they crack. I have really dry skin, and as a result, because of all the walking that we do, and because New Zealand or Auckland's weather is relatively cool at about 17 degrees, which is about 62 Fahrenheit, well, because of that, I have these kind of cracks on my heel, and I have to put this cream every single day. Otherwise, it gets worse, and then it gets painful, and then it becomes urgent, and then I have to do it. So you have these priorities, which is the urgent, the hobbies, and the hate doing. And some of the hate doing can be outsourced. So if I don't like to mow the lawn, I can outsource that. If I don't want to do the accounting, well, that goes to the accountant. And some of that you can palm it off to somebody else, but most of the stuff that you hate doing, or a lot of the stuff that you hate doing, still has to be done. And the most ironic thing of all is that we end up doing the things that we hate because, we have to do it, and we do the things that are urgent, and then we give up on the hobbies, the things that bring us the greatest amount of joy. Or we don't take up any new hobbies, we don't learn anything new, we don't get control over stuff, we don't get talented. And I don't know what kind of life that is. So obviously we have to recalibrate. No, we don't. We first have to calibrate. We first have to move that dial towards the radio station that we want. So let's go to the second part, which is calibration. I have a friend, Simon, and he's very keen on learning Italian. But he's also got 3 kids, very young kids, and Italian somehow seems to have a very low priority on that plan. Now, if you think that it's because of the young kids, then you'd be slightly off the mark. And that is because we don't have kids, and I've wanted to learn Spanish for the longest time. And I have the same problem as Simon. We all do our urgent stuff, we all do our hate-doing stuff, or at least some of the hate-doing stuff, and it takes away so much of our energy that we don't have any time to do the things that we really want. And so now we have to go to the calibration because we somehow have to learn Italian, do our gardening, do all the stuff that brings us joy. And just because it's a joyful experience, it's just because hobbies are supposed to be interesting and fun, we think that we don't have to have it on a list. And we do. Because if we don't have it written down somewhere, if we don't have it in some sort of system somewhere, it's very easy to just do what we have to do and then do nothing. And calibration just gets us back towards that precise signal, towards that radio station. It doesn't get us exactly there. It gets us somewhat there. You have this fluctuation between 2 different sounds. They're all merging into each other. That's your work, that's your hobbies or whatever, and they're all merging into each other. So calibration is when we sit down, we make a list and we say, okay, I want to learn Spanish. I want to draw in my diary every day. I want to do my music lessons, whatever it is that we want to do. And what we have done here is we've only taken one step. And it's a step that we've taken many times before. We've said we want to learn Spanish, or we've said we want to do the music lessons, and then we don't do it. And that's because we're making the mistake of calibration versus recalibration. Calibration is just moving towards something. Recalibration is completely different. Calibration is when we say we want to learn Spanish, and then we are moving towards that Spanish, away from all the urgent and the hate-doing stuff. So when I got that app, which is a habit app, and I wrote down, I want to learn Spanish, I want to draw, I want to do this, and I want to do that. First of all, I had to restrict it to just 2 or 3 things so that it could become somewhat of a habit. But I wasn't there because nothing was getting done. So I wasn't learning Spanish. I wasn't doing any drawing. I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do. And this is true for all of us. I mean, when I speak to Simon, it's the same thing. I want to learn Italian, but I don't get the time. And it's not because of the time. It's because we have only calibrated, but not recalibrated. So we start with calibration. We move towards that area. A sort of goal for ourselves, maybe on an app, maybe on a piece of paper, maybe on a post-it somewhere, but we calibrate. And that's very crucial. But it's the next part that really gets things done for you, and that is recalibration. Whenever we've driven a car, that's what we're doing the whole time. We are recalibrating. We have our hands on the wheel, we have a destination, we know where we're going, we probably have that GPS going, and we are recalibrating the whole time. We're slowing down, we're speeding up, we're turning left, we're avoiding other traffic, we're recalibrating. So recalibration is really making very precise changes based on what's happening in front of us. And what's happening when we set these goals is we have vague goals. So we say, let's learn Spanish, or let me do gardening, and it's vague. So then we go, okay, let's get a little more specific. Let's recalibrate a bit. And then we go, let's do 15 minutes of gardening, or let's do 30 minutes of painting. And then we find even that is a problem. So when we look at recalibration, we have to look at what's the worst possible scenario. Because every day we have chaos, and there is going to be a worst possible scenario. Well, for me at least, I know that I can do 5 words of Spanish any day of the week, any time of the year, anywhere, on the worst possible day. I could be in a hospital, on a hospital bed, or outside in the ward, or in any situation, and I could do 5 words. That's the worst possible scenario. And so that's what I did. I know it sounds ridiculous, 5 words, but then you multiply it over 300 days and you have 1,500 words. And maybe you don't get to 1,500 words, maybe you just get to 1,000 words, and it's still very impressive. You can't wait for the future because your hobbies are not going to wait for the future. It's like pouring a beer and going, okay, when my kids grow up, I'm going to drink that beer. No, you can't. Whatever hobby you have, whatever joy you have to feel it today. Now you have to feel that sense of accomplishment today. And so make this the worst possible day. Take 2 or 3 things that you want to do, and then start with the calibration. Say, hey, I want to do gardening, or I want to do painting, or I want to work with audio acoustics, or whatever. And then work it based on the worst possible scenario. And it's at this point in time that you have to have some sort of backup, some sort of accounting system in place. And there is a huge amount of resistance to this. Whenever I tell someone, maybe you should get an app, maybe you should put some kind of tick mark or check mark, And this is where you sense this huge amount of resistance, and people say, oh, I'm in control. No, you're not in control. Not any more than when you go out driving and you say, I'm in control. Yes, you're in control of your car, but there's all this other stuff happening around you. And that's going to determine how quickly you get there or whether you get there at all. And so a couple of things have to be done. The first is you have to have some kind of accounting system or someone that you're accountable to. And this is what we've covered many times before. But if you're just working by yourself, what I've done for myself is I've downloaded an app which I write my habits, just 2 or 3 things, and then I add what I can do in the worst possible day. And it's not complex. You can do it on a Post-it, you can do it on a sheet of paper, whatever it takes. But what's the thing or things that you can do on the worst possible day? And I found that that's kind of what gets me through the day. That's what I can go, okay, I missed a couple of days this week, but mostly I am headed in the direction that I want to, in all 3 areas, in the urgent, especially in the hobbies, and also the stuff that I hate doing, like foot cream. I really hate that. And this is the factor of calibration and recalibration and just getting all these 3 things moving towards that signal. But it's at this point in time that people say, I don't really need the hobbies. I enjoy my work. That's my hobby. And it's a good line. If you were a kid and you hated everything but your work, which is maybe studies, or you just worked as a kid, then yeah, as an adult, it makes perfect sense to just be doing your work. But as a kid, if you liked walking on the beach and picking up shells, or if you liked looking at plants, or if you liked taking pictures with an Instamatic camera, then there's a pretty good chance that you've lost that it has to be recalibrated, that you have to get back to those hobbies, that instead of just being one-dimensional in this very productive, I have to get all this work done, all this stuff is urgent all the time, well, maybe there is something called life as well. In fact, the reason why we started this whole 3-month vacation thing when we got to New Zealand was precisely because back in Mumbai, Renuka and I both worked, and we both enjoyed our work, and yet we'd forgotten this concept of hobbies. Renuka loves gardening. She wasn't gardening. I love photography. I love painting. I have no record of any paintings back then. And so we made this big leap into New Zealand, and we had to make changes as well. And that's kind of how psychotactics came about. It came about because we didn't want to do stuff the way we'd always done. We realized that there is a place for work, there is a place for the urgent stuff, and there is also a place for the things that bring you great amount of joy, and that is the hobbies. So if you don't already have a hobby, you might want to get one. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Where we looked at how to recalibrate your life's priorities. And we looked at the core priorities, which is urgent stuff, hobbies, and the hate doing stuff. And all of them need to be done. But of course, there's an imbalance, which means that we have to calibrate. We have to make some changes. But when we make those changes, we write it down, we never get anything done. And that is because we have just started on our journey. We are just going down the road. But now we have to recalibrate. And the recalibration depends on the worst possible day. And if you just have 3 words a day or 5 words a day or just the tiniest possible bit that you can manage, that's how you're going to get it done, provided you have some accountability system. And I use an app, and you can find a lot of these apps online. So go for it. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. But what's the one thing that you can do today? And the one thing that you can do today is to either get a hobby or to reignite a hobby. Maybe it was drawing, maybe it was knitting. As long as it's not a hobby like stalking someone, just reignite the hobby and get going. And then you can go down that path. But get that hobby going, because that takes you away from all of that urgent, depressingly urgent stuff that happens to us every single day of our lives. And with that, let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. It's just a few days away from the article writing course, the home study. And if that is something that you've been wanting to do for a long time, which is to improve your writing and do it in a very systematic way, because that's what we cover through the course. It's not just that you are possibly going to become a writer, but that you will become a writer, because there are precise steps there, and you are taken through those steps, and you will see that when you get the home study. Now, if you haven't already signed up and you haven't already got the goodies, then you should. So go to psychotactics.com/AW goodies. That stands for article writing goodies. And that puts you on the waiting list. And yep, you know what happens next. You get an email, you get some goodies. And when the 10th of October comes along, you decide you want to go ahead. Or maybe you just want to join 5000 BC, because 5000 BC is a very cool place. It's a place where I'm around all the time and other members are around. And you can ask your questions and get precise answers. It's a lot better than Google or YouTube. You get precise answers to your precise questions. And sometimes you don't know the questions are, but we can still work around that. So check out 5000 BC. There is a waiting period for that as well. It's not endless. It's 21 days. So you just have to go there, sign up, and then we make you wait for 21 days. And that's pretty much it. After that, we approve you, you get in. So go to 5000bc.com and we'll see you there. Bye for now. Still listening? When I was a kid, I used to run to the door to get the newspaper. So we lived on the second floor, as you probably know now. And this newspaper guy would run up the stairs and deliver the newspaper. So I could hear those steps as he ran up and put the newspaper into the door. And then I would rush to the door to get the newspaper. And so you can say I was an avid reader and an avid newsreader. And then I stopped. At some point in time, after we moved to Auckland, we decided that the news wasn't important. And we stopped reading the news because it was mostly problematic. It was just a whole bunch of rubbish being thrown at you. And frankly, it was depressing. Until this pandemic rolled along, and in New Zealand, at 1 o'clock, they announced how many cases we had, or if we had any cases, or if there's been any problem. And we got hooked back onto the news. And I got hooked onto 4 different news websites. I would wake up in the morning and read the news and jump from one website to the next, to the second, third, and fourth. And then during the day, invariably you go back, and then in the evening. And maybe this is not your problem, but this is my story. Anyway, I had to stop this, and that's why I used the app. So the app is about getting hobbies and doing stuff, but it's also about the stuff that you want to stop doing. And this was one of the things that I've stopped doing the last 2 weeks. I have no idea what's happening in the world. I have no idea what politicians are saying. And it sounds like, oh, you should know what's happening. But, the stuff that's important, my neighbor tells me, or someone will call me, like my brother-in-law called me when we went into lockdown. He called me and he told me. So just try it. Try it as a stop doing list as well. And I think it will be interesting. Oh, there's another PS. Last week, a client wrote in, and we usually ask them, do you listen to the podcast? And she said, oh, I don't listen to the podcast because I tend to put on the podcast just before I go to sleep. And Sean's voice is so calming that I only managed to listen to 3 or 4 minutes before I fall asleep. So there you go. Different reason for listening to this podcast.